the general election. It comes after the former Minister Tobias Ellwood called on him to suspend those involved. But the party says that would amount to assuming those involved are guilty until proven innocent. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer responded saying the Prime Minister's investigation into the betting scandal is designed to knock the matter into the long grass on the other side of the election. Meanwhile, Labour has been saying today it would end what it's calling DIY dentistry in England if it wins the general election. Labour accused the Conservatives of taking NHS dental services to death's door, comparing the state of the sector to a Charles Dickens novel. Labour says it would fund an extra 700,000 urgent appointments a year, with grants of up to £20,000 for new dentists in underserved areas. The Conservatives say they would see practices offered cash to take on new patients. But the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says that just won't be enough.
After 14 years of Conservative government, our NHS dentistry services have been left to rot, and so have people's teeth. It's going to take time to rebuild NHS dentistry, and that's why our starting point is 700,000 urgent dentistry appointments so that we can meet people's needs without them ending up in A&E, worse for them and also more expensive for the taxpayer. We're going to take prevention measures, particularly with children living in higher levels of deprivation, with supervised toothbrushing in schools, an approach that's proven to work.
Wes Streeting. Now, a court heard today how a shopping centre guard hatched a plan to attack the television presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, who's 37 years old, is accused of discussing his plan online, unaware he was engaging with an undercover police officer. His past convictions included tying up a 16-year-old girl and the attempted kidnap of women on a train under the threat of a gun. Prosecutors allege his history shows he knew what it would take to terrify and overpower a woman. The trial's expected to continue for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of the attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. It comes after she was convicted last August by another jury of murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. Warmer weather is expected to bring about a boost for the hospitality sector. Temperatures are expected to peak at or above 30 degrees in London on Wednesday, with most of the southeast of England seeing temperatures in the mid-20s. Bars, restaurants and hotels say it's likely to boost trade for them as more people head outdoors and enjoy longer evenings. It's in contrast to Britain's very rainy spring, which brought 30% more rain across England and Wales. And just lastly, the Royal Princess Anne is in hospital after sustaining minor injuries and concussion when she is believed to have been kicked by a horse at the Gatcombe Park estate in Gloucestershire. The princess, who's 73 years old, is understood to be awake. Precise details, though, not able to be confirmed yet due to her condition. A palace statement saying the king has been kept closely informed and joins the whole royal family in sending his fondest love to his sister for a speedy recovery. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Take a look at this, everybody. The luxury. It feels fabulous. Got a wonderful new desk. It's all going on here. I've lost my pots and pans at the front of the desk there. I've got separation anxiety. I think I need to go stroke them perhaps in the break. But look, alongside me tonight, my panel that used to entertain you on a Sunday morning breakfast together, pretty much. Look, it's the former Levelling Up Minister, Deanna Davison, and the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embry. Welcome. Look, you see, you are the chosen ones to break in this desk tonight.
We are
looking
honoured.
forward.
It's quite fabulous, isn't it?
It's very nice. It's very
massive.
nice. What do you guys think to it at home? You can get in touch with me, not just about my desk, but about anything, quite frankly. There's a lot I need to talk to you about tonight. 10 days to go to the election. I'll cross live in a second to our political correspondent for that, but also just to remind you, you can email gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website gbnews.com/yoursay, or you can tweet or X me. But now let's catch up with Olivia. She's been following the campaign trail today. Olivia, what have we missed?
Well, it's been yet another busy day on the campaign trail. Labour have been keen to talk about their new plan for NHS dentistry. There are some shocking statistics around emergency dentistry for children in particular. The most common reason that children between the ages of 6 and 10 go to A&E is because they need a tooth extracted. And Labour has said, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, Keir Starmer have both said that they want to end the dentistry desert. Now, part of that is this policy to put in place supervised toothbrushing for primary school aged children, and they want to bring in 3,000 new dentistry graduates to work in the areas where specifically dentistry is proving a huge problem. Stoke-on-Trent, Filton among them. But of course, the headlines haven't really been focused on that. Westminster hasn't really been focused on that. We've all been looking at yet another day in this gambling scandal. Now, the Prime Minister has tried to get on the front foot on this at last and has launched a CCHQ investigation into what went on. At the moment, he's caught in a bit of a bind because he says that while the investigation is ongoing, he can't really comment on the matter and he won't be suspending candidates. He went as far as to say that if they were found to be guilty of this, they would be leaving the party immediately. And he said he was furious about the whole thing. But for Labour, that isn't enough. And I think for quite a lot of voters, that won't be enough either. They suggest that that these candidates should be kicked out of the party immediately. And so the row rumbles on. Will this CCHQ investigation be wrapped up any quicker than the official investigation? And will Rishi Sunak have an answer on this by the election, which, as we know, is in just 10 days' time? Rishi Sunak has said that he doesn't know of any other MPs who are tangled up, embroiled in all of this, but perhaps you wouldn't really expect him to. He didn't know, of course, that his own PPS was involved in this. He has made clear as well to journalists that he himself didn't put a bet on the date of the election. So I guess he can be counting some small blessings today at the end of another very, very difficult day on the campaign trail.
Indeed, thank you very much for all of that, Olivia. I've got to say, I mean, we touched on this betting scandal when it started happening. It is such an appalling, low-rent way to kind of be remembered. What do you feel about this?
So I'm all for betting. I used to work in a bookies and a casino, and I will reveal right now on GBNews, I had a bet on the general election a year ago. I bet my last sort of £3 in an online account that the Tory party would win the most seats. Have a feeling that one will be less successful than some of the other bets that have been put on. It's shocking. I mean, and the thing that I don't understand about it is just the level of stupidity involved to do it, knowing there's a decent chance you'll get caught, but also the amounts that have been put on it, sort of like £100 bet here and there. If it was a life-changing amount that might change your life, it might be worth the risk, but otherwise, why risk your reputation for
Well, it seems like people have been doing, it looks like people may have been doing lots of different small amounts to try and go undetected, perhaps. I just think it is so low rent. Look, the IFS, they've been speaking out today about these manifestos, Tory and Labour, and essentially saying that there's conspiracy of silence when it comes to tax rises, spending plans, so on and so forth. Are we seeing honesty, Paul, in these manifestos?
No, I don't think either of the main parties are being upfront about the massive levels of investment that are needed to turn our economy and our country around. I think this country is in a sharp decline, and you don't get through that by tinkering at the edges. You need serious investment in our services, in our infrastructure. We've got sluggish growth in the economy, and that tinkering at the edges is not going to solve the problems, the fundamental problems I think that our economy has got. We need bold thinking. We haven't had much of that. We've had a few kind of platitudes and a few sort of promises in the manifesto, which are in various manifestos, both parties, which are OK as far as they go, but I don't really think get to the heart of our economic problems as a society. And the platitudes are not good enough. We're in a situation where, as I said, we're in sharp decline, and so many things in this country have just ceased working. I mean, the NHS record waiting lists, you can't get an appointment with your GP. We've just heard about the dentistry scandal. Housing, we've got a chronic housing shortage. Young people, young families just simply can't get on the housing ladder. People are paying extortionate rents. And I feel, Michelle, this is almost like a 1945 moment where the country was on its knees after the war, needed huge investment, huge rebuilding, a massive project, and no one has quite grasped the scale of that. And what we're seeing is, I think, not good enough. We're not seeing the kind of radical thinking and bold ideas that we need. I mean, both party leaders constantly talk about bold plans, but actually they haven't really got any, let's be blunt.
Yeah, no.
So there are a lot of things I agree with Paul on this. I think boldness is absolutely needed now. You know, you mentioned the sort of 1945 rebuild, and I think the post-COVID kind of era was always going to be kind of akin to that economically, to really make sure that the British economy is firing on all cylinders, but is working for people right across the country as well. I was levelling up, Minister. I know we're going to talk about that specifically later, but that's a sort of project that needs that bold thinking that Paul's spoken about to really address the kind of inequality of opportunities across the country. When it comes to the kind of specifics around tax and spending, I do kind of feel in a way that as a country we have kind of lost sight of the arguments that the Conservative Party was making back in sort of 2010 right through to 2015 around how important it actually is that a government does balance the books here. But balancing the books isn't just about tax and spend, it's about growth as well. Because as we know, if you grow the economy, the whole pie gets bigger, there's more to go around for everyone.
Yeah.
And the parties are talking about growth, but I haven't really seen any firm, tangible, bold plans that I think are really going to deliver that.
Well, a lot of what the Labour manifesto, has in there is kind of dependent on growth in the economy. And I guess this is one of the questions that people have. That's fascinating if you get your growth, but if you don't, then what are you going to do? And this is why a lot of people, Paul, believe that they're going to be tax rises that people are just not referencing in those manifestos.
Well, it's depressing when Rachel Reeves says we'll spend on public services once we achieve growth. Well, the point is, how do you achieve growth? You know, we were hit by a recession recently. People forget that. We've got a flatlining economy. The way that you recover quickly out of recession and you get growth is by spending on infrastructure, on public works, on investing in public services and so on, by getting real wages rising. That's how you stimulate the economy. That's how you improve the situation and you create more buoyant tax revenues, which then gives you the opportunity to spend more. So saying we'll spend once we get economic growth, I think undoes everything that we've learned about economics over the last century, which is that when you've got a flatlining economy, government as an active agent needs to intervene to stimulate the economy, and that means spending money. The quickest way out of a recession and a sluggish economy, a downturning economy, is to spend. That's the reality.
Short term maybe, but longer term we do have an issue here, don't we? Which is where our monthly sort of debt repayments are higher than our education budget. And the more we borrow, the worse that's going to get, unless we really do get that long-term growth. And my concern is that if we just keep borrowing on a short-term scale, it will never be achievable. And we're just storing ourselves a problem for future generations.
One of the things that I think is quite interesting is everyone just kind of has accepted the situation that we're in. You know, you're talking about post-World War II recoveries and all the rest of it. This whole absolute destroying of our economy was a political choice. And everyone seems to have kind of gone to sleep and forgotten about that and just marched forward. The choices that were made by both parties, actually, everyone seemed to be in cahoots that actually we need to close everything down and go harder and deeper for as long as possible. I'm astonished, actually, that people don't seem to be pushing back on the two main leaders about the choices that they made then that have led to the scenario that we found ourselves in now.
Well, the COVID inquiry is going on right now and is a long inquiry.
It's laughable, though, because it's focusing on who texted who what. It's pathetic. It should have been focusing on stuff like, should we ever, en masse, have been repeatedly and prolongingly locked down because of COVID? It doesn't ask that serious question.
I think, though, when you go back to the situation, particularly that first lockdown, which I think is the one that was probably the hardest for so many of us, we didn't know. There were so many unknowns here. And I guess when you're looking at scientific modelling that says this many people might die, when you are in that position, and I had to take these decisions, I had to stand up in Parliament and make these decisions. If that was on your head and you knew that might be on your heads, I wouldn't have made the decision any differently with the information I had then. When it came, if I may, Michelle, when it came to the later lockdowns, I was pushing back saying we shouldn't be doing these regional lockdowns. We should be allowing hospitality to open. You know, of course we support people who are shielding, we support the most vulnerable. But what about the impact on hospitality? What about the impact on young people? What about the impact on education? So, you know, no easy decisions to make at that point for anyone.
Yeah, but
I don't think any politician took them lightly either.
Alternate views were absolutely silenced during that debate. So it's all well and good saying the scientists said this and that and the other, but there was a lot of science scientists who were also undermined and shamed in some ways, but certainly silenced. But you lots at home, whenever I start on my little COVID rants, I can almost hear you groaning from the studio because you go, oh, Michelle, get over it, move on. Tell me your thoughts, though, on all of that. Also, by the way, I forgot to mention it off the back of the headlines, that story then about the heat wave where people are being told to drink water. Do you really need your government to tell you when it's warm that you need to take water out with you? I do worry that we're becoming a little bit of a nanny state, are we not? After the break, I want to talk to you about levelling up. Has it worked at all? Will it ever work? You tell me.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The new BBC Director of Sport, who's a man called Alex K. Jelski, who's downplayed fears raised by sports women about biological men competing in female categories. And he's also called Martina Navratilova, I've got to say, has to be probably the most successful woman tennis player in history, and a very brave woman too. She escaped the Iron Curtain and she came out. And Sharon Davis, he says, are not experts on the issue.
At the same time, transgender US swimmer Leah Thomas has lost her legal battle and been told that she cannot compete at the Olympics.
So Leah Thomas made an appeal to World Aquatics, who have this rule in place that says that they protect the female category, as does athletics and world cycling. And because Leah doesn't actually qualify, because Leah isn't training, so she's not even someone that would be potentially part of the Olympic team. They've just said that, you know, you don't qualify to be able to bring this case. It's been thrown out on a technicality, thank goodness, and which means that, you know, swimming will not have any males beating elite females in Paris this summer, which was particularly good for me, bearing in mind that I now have to be very careful about what I'm allowed to say and not say. We're not allowed to use the words biological male, transitioned male. I mean, just every single possible way that we could explain that the person in the race wasn't a female, and it only affects women. It doesn't affect men. You know, females that identify as male are no risk to men's sport in any shape or form. It's just women that are losing their opportunities. The thing I take the most offence to, and this is very serious, and this needs to be dealt with by the BBC, and this is why I wrote to Tim Davie. In that article, he compared males that are identifying as women in women's sport to Jamaican and Ethiopian females being allowed to compete.
What?
The People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co. Till 7. The former Levelling Up Minister, Diana Davison, is alongside me, as is the trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. Welcome back, everybody. Look, the Levelling Up Minister, former, is alongside me, so I thought it'd be quite rude not to discuss this topic tonight. My viewer, Mick, he says on the website, can you ask the Levelling Up Minister what exactly was levelled up? I'm just going to cut to the chase. Let's just go straight with that question.
I could run through an awful lot. I mean, let's talk about what levelling up is, right? Because people say they get sick of the slogans, they get sick of the platitudes. It's social mobility, right? It's making sure that people, regardless of whether you're from Bath, Barnsley, Bristol, whatever, have got access to the same great opportunities as everyone else in the country. And for me, it's the thing that's always driven me in politics. And I know it's a big interest of yours as well, Michelle, around social mobility. I mean, I'm from Sheffield, you're from Hull. We know it's not always easy for northern kids to actually get on in life. And that's why when I was offered the role, I absolutely jumped at the chance to take it. But it's difficult because it was never the sort of thing that can be delivered in a 5-year electoral cycle. And I think it was probably a mistake of governments and manifestos not to be honest about that from the outset, because the only way that we're actually going to fix some of the massive regional disparities in access to opportunities, it's going to take a generation or two. And you look at how they've done it in Germany, the kind of post-reunification mission they went about, where they have spent hundreds of billions of euros and taken decades to really get to the root causes of what the issues are: education, transport, access to jobs, land, housing, and tackled it systematically. That's the only way we're ever going to level up. And actually, the government made a really good start with the Levelling Up white paper. And I'm not just saying that because I kind of have to, and it was part of my remit. It actually went into that really holistic view, looking at education, transport, health outcomes, access to jobs, quality of jobs, skills, looking at everything and looking at how different government departments can come together to address them. The problem is, we didn't have much time, and of course, for 2 years of it, the whole government was distracted by COVID.
But how can you say you didn't have much time? Because people will shout at the screen and say that the Tories essentially had 14 years.
Well, the Levelling Up mission being a kind of #1 mission, of course, was 2019 a promise. I think it's something that we should have been tackling right from the get-go. And of course, we had George Osborne's Northern Powerhouse project,
I remember it well.
Which I think was a good first step in recognising actually that the north of England really did need a boost to get back to its former glory. The wider Levelling Up project was, to recognise that there are other parts of the country that struggle too, like I'm thinking places like Cornwall, the other regions, Scotland, Wales, etc. So I think it's important we took that more holistic view, but ultimately this was never something that was going to be fixed overnight.
So do you feel you were successful when you look in the mirror? Do you think, yeah, I did a good job, I achieved stuff?
Well, I was in the job for a year. And I think about the individual areas where I was able to get projects delivered, the visits I went on, the people I met, and the difference it will make to their small communities. Was I successful in levelling up the whole country? God, of course not, because as I say, that is going to take a generation to fix. But the individual towns, the villages I visited, the units we were able to bring back in, the skill centres that we managed to open because of government investment, it's a first step, but it's a first step that for the people it will actually touch really will make a difference.
There you go, viewer Mick. Has she answered your question or not?
So, Mick.
Paul?
I think there was a lot of fine talk, but I think the delivery just wasn't good enough in the end. I think the promise to those working class communities was we'll bring jobs, we'll bring industry, we'll bring regeneration, we'll bring prosperity, higher wages, higher skills and so on. And I'm sure the intent was there, actually. And it was a message that certainly hit home at the 2019 general election, that and get Brexit done, two really convincing messages for those communities. But a little bit like Brexit, actually, I think people in those communities look at it now and say, well, you promised this and you didn't quite believe in it and you fell short of delivering what you promised. And similarly with levelling up, I don't think those responsible really grasped, going back to our first discussion, the magnitude of what needs doing in terms of rebalancing our economy and tackling some of the real grotesque geographical inequalities that still exist in this country, which absolutely deface this country. We don't make anything anymore. We've got a huge trade deficit. We've got a manufacturing base which is withering away. We've seen deindustrialisation on a massive scale. I've never accepted the argument that we can't make things, that we can't have a thriving manufacturing base, because you look at places like Japan and Germany, they still seem to do pretty well as advanced Western industrial societies. And I think that we could do that as well. But, as I said, I think we put all of our investment in financial services. I think we think that's, the be-all and end-all. And when it comes to the real economy, the productive sector, where goods are made, where wealth is created, those small and medium-sized businesses in small-town Britain, blue-collar Britain, I don't think there's anything like the focus on those places that there should be.
I think there are some areas of the country where there's been more success than others. I think about Teesside, for example, where Ben Houghton was elected as the mayor, and there was actual proper devolution of power and of money, so that a local area with good local leadership coming together to make it a success, and has really managed to do that through the Freeport, through Teesworks, through the investment in heavily skilled jobs, which people are really starting to feel a difference in terms of their quality of life. Because I've spoken to them out on Teesside.
But unless my memory fails me, because I remember that we scrapped HS2, and it was all about, right, we're going to get rid of HS2, we're going to take this cash, we're going to reinvest, and it will be a lot of it going into levelling up. Well, I'm sure I can remember that levelling up money, some of it being spent on, I don't know if it was potholes or something like that, in London.
So some levelling up money, some levelling up money did get spent in London because it was they were all assessed on a project by project basis. And as you'll know, in any city, there are bits that need that leg up and need a help more than anywhere else. Yeah, that is a bit of a mick take. Come on, if you've got this thriving, bustling city of London, and then you're stopping the connections, the HS2 connections from it and to it, and all the rest of it, and then you're telling people we're getting rid of HS2 because we're going to level up the country, and then you take that money and you stick some of it into London for whatever reason. That is a bit of a joke. No, Michelle, you're forgetting the best bit. We only got rid of the northern bit of HS2, so only the bit we actually really needed. I was very anti-HS2 the whole time anyway.
Yeah, but why would the Tories do that? Because to me, it's just such basic stupidity.
So the rationale was that money wouldn't be spent on a line to London because it would be spent on local transport projects in the north. That was the rationale, and that was the argument that was made. And when that was announced, I said, OK, do you know what? Fair enough. This seems like a really good plan.
But why spend some of that money in London?
Yeah,
that's my question.
Well, precisely. I can't answer that. That was after my time.
But didn't you raise that and flag that and be like, guys, everyone?
Oh yeah, of course. Like, I think all of those of us that were in the sort of Northern Research Group and others, we're not quiet, Michelle. You'll know as you were at our conference.
I remember the last time I saw you, we was in Doncaster, and we were speaking at an event about levelling up the north, and Boris Johnson actually was supposed to be. I don't know how.
I forgot about
the
that.
most random things in life, but Boris Johnson was supposed to be there. He was supposed to be headlining that event, and he didn't turn up. And the reason he didn't
you two were there. That's why.
Maybe
it wasn't because I knew yours two was there. Thank you very much. Chirping over my shoulder there, Paul Embry. It's because he decided to prioritise a visit to Ukraine instead. I'll come up to that after the break. The whole because Nigel Farage, he's got in trouble for some of the stuff that he's been saying about Ukraine. But that whole notion that you would even take a penny of so-called levelling up funds from the north and use them for anything in London, that is ridiculous, is it not?
Yeah, and contrary to what the Tories have said over recent years, that they really want to focus on those disadvantaged communities, those sort of post-industrial areas which have suffered from deindustrialisation, socio-economic inequality and so on. They should have had, if I were an advisor, which I'm not obviously to the Tories, I would have said you need to now, having won the votes from those red wall constituencies, all of these millions of people who've never voted for you before and suddenly have done, you need to have a laser-like focus on those communities. Those votes have been given to you. They've been loaned to you. They're there on trust. And, the quid pro quo is you have to deliver for those communities. And I think the Tories felt, right, Labour's in such a state, we've got all these millions of votes, we're going to be probably governing for the next decade, and actually we probably don't really need to focus on those communities, those red wall working class communities, as much as people are telling us. And I think in not doing so, they've made a major strategic error. Stupid.
What do you make of it all at home? We started as well. One of the references that people were making were about the policy about supervised teeth brushing in schools. Victoria on the website viewer there, she's got in touch and said, funny how I managed to go my whole childhood without rotten sweets, but that was without rotten teeth, but that was because I was brought up to brush my teeth and only ever eat sweets as a treat. She's asking again about this whole parental responsibility when it comes to that. Have we got nanny state gone mad with some of these policies, or do you support them? Coming up after the break, then Nigel Farage, he's had to hit back at some of the comments that he's made about the situation in Ukraine. Personally, I thought he was talking sense, but many people absolutely whipping themselves up into a frenzy about it. What says you?
Evening weather update time from the Met Office here on GB News. Many of us having something of a hot spell over the next few days, but nothing exceptional for the time of year, and it isn't going to last too long. In fact, already on Tuesday we'll see cloud increasing across the northwest from these weather fronts that are trying to trickle in. But high pressure is dominating for many of us. Has been quite cloudy over Wales and southwest England today. That cloud breaking up more through this evening. Some mist and low cloud clinging to the south coast, and there's the cloud I talked about, bringing some patchy rain to the Highlands and the Western Isles through the night. For most, though, a dry night, fine night and a warm one. Temperatures holding up 15 or 16 degrees in most urban areas. So, yes, it's going to be a warm start to Tuesday, and by the afternoon we could be topping out at 30 Celsius. Some mist and low clouds still around the coasts in the south, but generally plenty of blue sky here, and a brighter day for South Wales and southwest England compared to today, but it will be a duller day for Northern Ireland. The cloud arriving here through the night, and that cloud also getting into the Highlands and the Western Isles for first thing. So a bit of a damp and drizzly start, but some sunshine for eastern Scotland and through the central belt, at least initially, but the cloud will increase here as we go through the day. Cloud will bubble up also over parts of northern England, and there is the likelihood of one or two pretty isolated but potentially quite heavy showers over northern England during the afternoon. We'll see a bit of rain also for eastern Scotland, maybe a few showers through the central belt. Probably brightening up for Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland. Plenty of hot, hazy sunshine further south, 30 degrees likely close to London. Wednesday, again, very warm with some sunshine across the south. A bit more mist and low cloud on the east coast, however, so it could be quite grey here, but a brighter day for Northern Ireland, some sunshine, and again across the south and east with some sunshine, temperatures likely to top out around 30 Celsius. That's all from me for now. Goodbye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Well, the M6 in Warwickshire remains shut northbound at Junction 2, the M69 exit for Coventry. A lorry was on fire, long queues to just after Junction 1 for Rugby and on the A46 Coventry bypass and through Churchover on the A426 as you divert. And on the M6 southbound, staying in the same neck of the woods, a lane's closed just before the Walsall-Wolverhampton exit where a car's broken down. The M25 is closed anti-clockwise on the western stretch at the scene of an earlier collision just north of the M40. Recovery works underway, long queues back into Hertfordshire to Watford and the other way back to Heathrow Terminal 4. On the Kent stretch, the motorway is partly blocked anti-clockwise at Ford Alpington. A car's broken down and caught fire, causing queues back to the M26. And in Devon, the A38 is blocked eastbound at Plymouth near the Tamar Bridge and the scene of an accident causing long queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co with you till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside me the former Levelling Up Minister Deanna Davison and the trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. Jill, I did just pass on the message about Deanna's nails to her as well. Don't worry, it didn't go unnoticed. Look, there's been a row brewing, so there has Nigel Farage. He has called the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson a liar and a hypocrite. This, of course, boils down to the fact that Boris Johnson said that Nigel Farage is parroting Putin's lies on Ukraine. Are you keeping up with me? Look, this all stems from Nigel Farage in an interview with Nick Robinson, and one of the things that he was saying is, and I don't know why people people selectively ignore this point. He says he doesn't condone Putin invading Ukraine. He makes that point crystal clear, but then what he goes on to say is that actually he feels that acts that the EU and NATO have done by kind of expanding their kind of borders and all the rest of it has essentially provoked Russia. Now, this has really created a backlash, and many people are saying that this is Nigel Farage's first misstep, so to speak. What do you think to it?
I'd probably agree to an extent that it is a misstep. And I think the simple point is, you know, he makes the point around NATO kind of incursion, but NATO is not an offensive alliance. NATO has always been a defensive alliance. And the way that the people of Ukraine voted to remain independent and then made a decision to join NATO to protect themselves, I think is perfectly legitimate. I think it's actually completely wrong to say that that is an incursion. However, as we know with foreign affairs, particularly with power players like Putin, it's a game of 4D chess, isn't it? You have to keep your eye on your opponent. You have to know how they might react. I suppose that's the point that Farage was trying to make. But I think this was a mistake when, you know, overwhelmingly, I think people in Britain are very pro-democracy, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, and in that sense support Ukraine. And it's not necessarily about the exact words you say, it's how they're taken. And so in that sense, I think it is a misstep.
Well, Nigel Farage, he was speaking at an event today, so he actually responded to the criticism that Boris Johnson had made. Like I said, Boris Johnson came out and attacked him on Twitter. Let's look how Nigel Farage responded.
Let's have a little look at something, guys, shall we? Here is Boris Johnson. Daily Mail, are you watching? Here is Boris Johnson from 2016. This is what Boris said. Boris blames the European Union for war in Ukraine.
I've got to say as well, it wasn't just Boris Johnson that said that. I think Boris said that in 2016. The Perp as well. God, when I say that with my accent, it sounds very weird, but you know what I mean? Yeah, the Perp, he said similar things as well about NATO essentially provoking Putin. Paul Embry, what says you?
I agree with you and the Perp, I have to say. I think you can condemn the invasion on the one hand, and I do. It was barbaric and it was wrong, but also believe that the eastward march of the EU and NATO and the manner in which they've courted Ukraine right up against Russia's border was provocative. It doesn't justify the invasion, but it was provocative. Look, when the Soviets wanted in the 1960s to base ballistic missile sites on Cuba within firing range of the United States, most of the West, including the White House, as we know, said that that was a provocative act. And I don't think anyone would deny that that was a provocative act. If Mexico or Canada were to enter into a military alliance with Russia and China right on America's doorstep, would the White House say, well, we have no problem with this because we respect the sovereignty of independent nation states and they should be allowed to enter into whatever military alliances they wish. It's not any of our business. I think we all know full well America would go absolutely mad if something like that were to happen.
If I may, Paul, the difference there, though, was that the placing of missiles was more of an offensive act, whereas NATO is a defensive alliance.
Well, Cuba wouldn't say that, because Cuba would say, actually, we were worried about an American invasion, with good reason, and therefore we needed the support of the Soviets in order to repel that invasion. But I just think, Deanna, either people believe in the sovereignty of independent nation states and the right of those states to enter into their own military alliances, or they don't. I don't think you can say, well, we defend that principle when it comes to countries right on Russia's border. You know, they should have the right to enter into an alliance with NATO, which, let us not forget, was explicitly set up after the Second World War as an anti-Soviet force, essentially. And I think people in Russia, when they see that encroachment, are probably uneasy about it as they see it getting closer to their border, in the same way that Americans would understandably be uneasy if similar military alliances between Russia and China started creeping up on their borders. And I've said on the programme many times, I'm concerned at the rhetoric is for more and more war the whole time. At the end of the day, we need to get people around the table to start suing for peace. And there are very, very few voices, I think, in the international community who are doing that at the moment. And my fear, and I really hope that the invasion is repelled, I genuinely do, but my fear is that Ukraine is burning through manpower and resources faster than they can replace them. And had they sued for peace from a position of strength some time ago, when people were urging them to do it, they may have found themselves ultimately in a better position than suing for peace, as they may well do in the not-too-distant future, from a position of weakness. So you know, it's easy to say, no, it's all terrible, and you know, what Farage said is terrible, and I don't agree with him on many things, but I do think we have to take a broader geopolitical view of these things. We don't do that.
Ursula on the website says, I think Nigel is way off the mark on this topic. The West is the bear that got perked. She talks about things like the annexation of Crimea. She's saying that people were amassing troops on the Ukrainian border and so on and so forth. I can tell you, though, there's a lot of people actually completely agreeing with what Nigel Farage had to say. I've got to say, I'm one of them. I found it very peculiar that people just deliberately seem to ignore the context of what he was saying. They go to the second part of what he said, which is all about actually what Putin did and how he's responded, but they completely ignore that first part about when he says he does not condemn this invasion, and of course then the subsequent people who have lost their lives. I find it interesting why people are whipping themselves up into a frenzy. Do you think it is because people are actually genuinely worried about the impact that Nigel Farage is having and the Reform Party are having on the election?
I don't know if it is, because I think if Nigel Farage had said this 3 to 4 months ago, the same frenzy would have happened even when he wasn't sort of directly involved in the election. I think he's the sort of Marmite character where people like to have a strong view one way or the other. But
so you don't think they're making hay with this because they're desperately trying to say, because they know that there's something about the situation in Ukraine which really does galvanise people's support. It really does. And they know that. So you don't think that they're making hay with this to try and deter people from voting for Reform UK?
Well, I mean, if your opponent makes a misstep, of course you do. But my point is, I don't think this is necessarily unique to the election, because I think if Nigel Farage had said this 3 to 4 months ago, there probably would have been a very similar reaction.
It's a very bizarre reaction. I would have called it bizarre and ridiculous reaction whenever it was happening. What do you think to it? I can tell you divided opinions coming through on the emails as we speak. After the break, the Labour Party apparently looks set to make it slightly easier to so-called change your gender. What do you think to all this? See you in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Today, we've got a veteran who endeavours to help those suffering from anxiety in all its various forms and manifestations.
Yes, over 3 decades, Simon Lee has established himself as a pioneer, seeking new ways to coach personal development and mental strength.
Oh, look, there's this famous phrase, isn't it, that hard times create weak men and weak men create hard times. Is that the kind of philosophy that your work is based on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because as a child, I received a masterclass in how weak men create hard times.
Did you go through hard times as a kid?
We had 3 toxic men in the family, and they caused the family no end of grief, trauma and hardship. So, and at the time when you're going through it, you think, well, you can't help but fall into a victim mentality. You think, why me? Why am I going through this? But actually, I couldn't do what I do now without that masterclass.
Do you mind me asking who those men were?
Yep, it's fine. One of them was my stepfather.
Yeah.
One of them was my grandfather, and one of them was my uncle.
Right.
So they're all inner family members. And without exception, all of them, outside of the family doors, wanted to put themselves across as moral pillars of society.
How do you turn that story around and be the man that you are today and turn what you went through into a positive? How do you do that?
You've established that pretty much you can, choose to be a victim of your circumstance or use it as inspiration to do better and say, you know what, when I'm older, for example, if you had a bad childhood, I want to make sure my kids get the kind of childhood I didn't have. So how do you relay that to the people you mentor now, I guess?
What we do, I set up something called Unlimited Courage. We talk about giving men a primary aim of courage. So we bring in philosophies such as Stoicism, our own 7 courages. They love it. And I must admit, when I found it, I felt like I'd found the Holy Grail.
Wow.
The People's Channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel. Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co with you till 7. The former Levelling Up Minister, Deanna Davis, and alongside me, as is the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embry. All I can say is that you guys have very different opinions on that last topic of Nigel Farage. Lots of people as well are getting in touch saying that you would dispute that NATO are purely a defensive alliance. You know what? We'll have that conversation perhaps another day, but for now, Labour, apparently they're going to set to ditch guidelines that have been brought in. Of course, you remember all this about whether or not children should be taught about this very contested gender ideology. Also, apparently, it seems that they are going to change the rules, which are requiring transgender people to live as their preferred gender for 2 years before they can legally change their sex. I mean, goodness gracious me. Let's listen to what Wes Streeting has had to say about some of this.
I feel actually really optimistic that we can find a way through that treats trans people in our country with the dignity, the respect, the support and care that they deserve without compromising on the sex-based rights of women.
Paul Embry, your thoughts?
I despair, to be honest. I think it's elevating feelings over facts. I think in the light of the CASA review, I think the Labour Party should have steered well clear of the proposals that they're making. And I'm a bit old-fashioned in the sense that I believe there are two sexes, male and female, with a very tiny number of people who are what's called intersex. And when they talk about, you have to live in your chosen gender, what is living in a gender? What is living as a woman? Can somebody tell me what living as a woman means? Does it mean you have to dress in pink and you have to do the washing up? I hope it doesn't mean that. I thought we'd moved on from...
Get out of your stereotypes.
Well, exactly. That's my point. I hope we've moved on from those sorts of days. So the people who kind of make these proposals, I think, need to explain exactly what they mean by them. Because I think the debate over this, and by the way, look, I absolutely believe that people who feel that, they were born the wrong sex, I understand and sympathise with those people, and we've got to treat them with compassion. Of course we do. We've absolutely got to protect them against any form of discrimination. But what you can't allow to happen is for women's hard-won sex-based rights to be undermined and to be unpicked, to indulge people, frankly, of the opposite sex. I think, as I say, the debate has been won largely on that. I think there is now a significant body of opinion, scientifically and politically, who understand, especially post-CAS, that some of this stuff really needs to be challenged. And I think Labour, by kind of continuing to peddle this, is putting itself at odds with mainstream Britain.
I mean, of course, J.K. Rowling, she spoke out at the weekend as well and said, essentially, I'm summarising, but she basically said she doesn't feel like she can vote for the Labour Party whilst this is his current stance. Deanna, what do you say to it all?
I find myself always having a difficult time when it comes to the debate around trans rights versus women's rights, because I think a lot of the time this isn't necessarily a battle between the two. And my concern about this debate more broadly is that it gets really inflamed from both edges. Whereas actually I think the vast majority of people would take the stance that Paul took there, saying we just want people to, live their lives, we should treat everyone equally with respect. But of course there are points at which this comes to a head. I'm thinking of single-sex spaces, particularly domestic abuse shelters, etc., where it is possible to have a respectful discussion on this and come up with a solution that pretty much works for everyone. Now, I won't pretend to know the ins and outs of the Labour proposals because I haven't looked in a great level of detail. And again, I find myself to some extent in two minds, because having spoken to people who've gone through the process of obtaining a gender recognition certificate, it can be quite degrading. It's effectively going in front of a panel, providing a hell of a lot of evidence that you have lived in the opposite gender. Everyone's experience of that is very different. So providing that evidence can be very difficult, and it can be a very lengthy and a very emotional process. So on the one hand, I do think that simplifying that in the sense of only having one direct contact with one doctor is probably better for that individual, but also probably better for the health service to take out a little bit of the kind of manpower involved in kind of giving out these gender recognition certificates. But I think it is right that there's a proper process in place to make sure that there is protection here. You know, I used to kind of think that perhaps self-ID might be the way forward, but actually I think it is right. There is a proper approved process, particularly if you're going to change official documents, if you want to change the gender on your passport or what
But
have you.
I sometimes I just want to. I think I'm in a dream world. I need to pinch myself, see how I'm actually in reality, because I don't even understand how we've got into this situation where all of a sudden you've got this biological reality, biological sex, which is no one can dispute that, and then we've created these other categories like legal sex, and you can change your. I mean, what even is a legal sex? What is it?
I think it's the gender that people live by. And we know that there are legitimately trans people out there.
I know, but if a man wants to put a dress on and feels that he is called Marjorie or whatever it is, that sure. I mean, I don't even understand how we've got into this situation where it was ever indulged. That that man can now be regarded as a woman.
But I think it's that, respectfully, that level of rhetoric that I think turns this debate into something that it doesn't need to be. There are people who right from birth have felt like they're in the wrong body, and that is difficult. Emotionally, that is difficult, challenging. There is a reason that mental health issues amongst the trans community are some of the highest of any community in Britain and in the world. And I think if you've lived pretty much your entire life from being a child, feeling you're in the wrong body, there's such a disrespectful attitude towards that. And I think of, you know, some of the trailblazers who've appeared in media, of which there aren't many, but I think of Ella on Married at First Sight. We always have this debate as though it's going to be a really buff man walking
I have no
into...
idea who Ella off Married at First Sight is, by the way. I don't watch Ella.
So some of your viewers might. An incredibly feminine, attractive, gorgeous trans woman who, if she walked into a women's bathroom, nobody would have any idea. And conversely, there are trans men, people born female, who are incredibly buff, incredibly rugged. And I think when people suggest that, you know, the whole sort of bathrooms debate, etc., I would much rather have an Ella from Married at First Sight who is absolutely no threat than someone who looks incredibly buff and rugged, but because they were born female, should be using my bathroom.
I mean, never will the twain meet, because I just do not believe at all that a man can become a woman just because a man wants, you know, he started off as a boy that was feeling uncomfortable and all the rest of it. Somehow he is now a woman. That will no one will ever convince me. And whilst you can say that man might have, I don't know who the people are that you're referencing, but they look feminine and all the rest of it, that's really wonderful, and I'm pleased that you look great. You would never be able to, for example, get pregnant. You would never be able to breastfeed a child. You will never have periods. You will never be female. Mm-hmm. However much I might wish that I was a 6-foot supermodel, and that's fascinating, but that's in my head. It's not reality.
But I don't think anyone's disputing that. My point is simply on the, you know, some of the way the debate goes is I don't want a man in a dress coming into my bathroom. But actually, when you look at the reality of how most genuinely trans people live, that's just not the reality at all.
I just want to live in a world where facts matter, but I think maybe that ship has sailed. Look, that's all I've got time for. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Deanna, for your time, and thank you to each and every one of you at home. Don't go anywhere, though, because Camilla Tominey is up next. That's all for me. Night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, weather update time from the Met Office here on GB News. Many of us having something of a hot spell over the next few days, but nothing exceptional for the time of year, and it isn't going to last too long. In fact, already on Tuesday we'll see cloud increasing across the northwest from these weather fronts that are trying to trickle in. But high pressure is dominating for many of us. It has been quite cloudy over Wales and southwest England today. That cloud breaking up more through this evening. Some mist and low cloud clinging to the south coast. And there's the cloud I talked about, bringing some patchy rain to the Highlands and the Western Isles through the night. For most, though, a dry night, fine night and a warm one. Temperatures holding up 15 or 16 degrees in most urban areas. So, yes, it's going to be a warm start to Tuesday, and by the afternoon we could be topping out at 30 Celsius. Some mist and low clouds still around the coasts in the south, but generally Plenty of blue sky here, and a brighter day for South Wales and South West England compared to today, but it will be a duller day for Northern Ireland. The cloud arriving here through the night, and that cloud also getting into the Highlands and the Western Isles for first thing. So a bit of a damp and drizzly start, but some sunshine for eastern Scotland and through the central belt, at least initially, but the cloud will increase here as we go through the day. Cloud will bubble up also over parts of northern England, and there is the likelihood of one or two pretty isolated but potentially quite heavy showers over northern England during the afternoon. We'll see a bit of rain also for eastern Scotland, maybe a few showers through the central belt. Probably brightening up for Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is Johnny Ratner. The M6 in Warwickshire remains closed northbound to Junction 2. The M69 exit for Coventry, a lorry was on fire. The queue starts just after the Rugby exit, Junction 1. It's also solid on the A46 Coventry Eastern Bypass and through Churchover on the A426 as you divert. In Nottingham City Centre, Wilford Street remains shut for a police investigation. The M25 remains closed anti-clockwise just north of the M40 for recovery work. Long queues back into Hertfordshire to 19 at Watford and the other way to Heathrow. And the M4 is down to 2 lanes heading towards London. Just before the M25, a car and a van have collided, causing long delays. In Essex, the A127 is closed Southend bound near Rayleigh following an accident. And in Kent, the A256 Hayne Road at Ramsgate blocked by a multi-vehicle collision off Manston Road. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.